It's a good fish. Come here, bub. Oh, yeah. Oh, baby. Water's 43 degrees out. Just got a nice little largemouth right there. Today, I want to talk about the 4 S's of cold water bass fishing. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. Before we get into the video, this video is brought to you by SPORTSMAN'S Sportsman's Outfitters has really stepped up over the last several months and really has helped supported this channel to help me bring you guys content like this. Right now, they're having some big sales. They always seem to have the best prices though. So if you click the link down below in the description, you're gonna land on SPORTSMAN'Soutfitters.com where you can buy your favorite lures, your favorite rods, your favorite line, all of your outdoor needs at SPORTSMAN'Soutfitters.com. So click that link below and support those guys that are supporting this channel. So I'm out here doing a little fishing today and it's cold out. I think the air temperature is somewhere around 37, 38 degrees and the water temperature is starting to come down. It's 43 degrees pretty much everywhere I've been in the lake. And so today I really want to talk about that cold water bass fishing and what you can do that's going to help you to get more bites in cold water. Now, whether you're fishing in big lakes like I am today, or whether you're fishing in ponds, you can use these tips to help you catch a lot more bass in cold water or during the winter. So there are 4 S's that you can actually follow anytime you're fishing cold water. And we're going to go down the list and tell you what each S represents. But before I talk about each of those S's, the biggest thing that you can do to help you catch more fish when you're fishing in cold water situations is make sure you're fishing near deeper water. Deeper water is going to be relative to the body of water that you are fishing. If you're fishing in a pond, deep water might only be 8 foot of water. But if you're fishing in a big lake, kind of like I am today, deep water is about 16 to 20 foot of water. Now today, the few bass that I have caught, I actually caught those fish in fairly shallow water. They were actually sitting in probably about 4 or 5 foot of water. But the reason that they were there was because it was it was immediately next to deep water. They were actually sitting kind of on a ledge with a little bit of brush on it, and it dropped straight down into 20 foot of water. And that really is the biggest thing that you can do, is be near deep water. Now, if you don't have electronics, or maybe you're just fishing from the bank, simply just cast your lure out there and count it down. You're gonna be able to tell when you're fishing in deeper water because it's simply gonna take your lure longer to get to the bottom. So let's start with the first S of cold water bass fishing, and that is slow. One of the biggest things that you can do when you're fishing in cold water, and I'm talking about like water that is less than 50 degrees, anything in the 40s, in the upper 30s, the big thing that you can do is simply fish slow. And this can be really hard to do when you're out there fishing because sometimes during the winter, you're not going to get a ton of bites. And so it's easy for us as fishermen to just kind of get antsy. We want to go out, we want to catch fish, and we start to fish too fast. And we can actually fish way too fast through areas where we're simply going to miss bass that are there. So fishing slow is super critical. And I'm not always talking about fishing a slow moving lure like a jig or a shaky head. You can fish lures like crankbaits and jerkbaits in cold water, but the key to fishing them is fishing them slow. You're not gonna fish them the same way you fish them during the summertime. If you're fishing a crankbait, cast that crankbait out and just creep that thing along. You want it to start hitting the bottom and just very lightly tick the bottom. A lot of us know that fishing a jerkbait in cold water catches bass, and you fish it a lot slower than you do in the summer. Sometimes in the summer, I'm really bringing that bait constantly. In the winter and during cold water, I'm gonna pause that bait for 5, 10, 15 seconds, and then I'm gonna pop it a couple more times. So fishing slow is a must, and when you get bit, when you get that first bite, that is when you really wanna put the brakes on, literally stay put, fan cast around, and just be as slow as you can, because a lot of times during cold water months, those bass are gonna group up. So the second S of cold water bass fishing is subtle. Subtle is a huge thing that you should think about when it comes to lure selection when you're fishing cold water. When I'm fishing during warmer weather, you know, in the summertime, I really like to have baits a lot of times that have a lot of action. You know, this is when I'm gonna pick up a Texas rig crawl that, you know, the tails kick back and forth. In cold water, fish are not going to want a lot of action. So for instance, like today, I typically fish some sort of crawl on the back of my jig. And in this case, I'm actually just fishing a chunk style bait. This chunk really doesn't have a lot of action. It doesn't kick down there. It's very subtle. And that subtle action is what gets you bites during cold water. Now, another thing you want to think about when it comes to fishing a subtle lure is the rattles that are in a lure. Some of the best cold water crankbaits that are out there on the market actually don't have a lot of rattles or any rattles in them. A lot of your balsa baits, baits like a Shad Rap and baits like a DT6. These are lures that have very little, if any, rattle to them at all. And these are the ones that you want to fish in cold water. Why? Because they are a subtle lure. They have a subtle, tight action, and that's what gets bit during cold water fishing. All right, guys, the third S when it comes to fishing cold water is small. This is something that you really want to think about again when it comes to lure selection. You don't always want to go out there fishing a huge bait during the middle of winter in the coldest months. Now, there are some exceptions. Some places like out in California, when they get to be in their winter months, that's when they really like to throw those bigger wedge tail style swim baits. But when you're fishing in water temps that are in the upper 30s and upper 40s, I'm not saying that you can't get bit on a big lure, but your smaller lures tend to get a lot more bites. And this is the simple reason, is that bass simply aren't feeding as often as they do during the summer. You know, as I talked about earlier, a bass is cold-blooded, so their metabolism slows a lot during the winter and during cold water months. So therefore, they could eat a crawfish every now and then, and it's gonna sustain their body for a longer period of time, where during the summer, they might have to eat a big bluegill, or they might have to eat something big to just sustain them for that day. So fishing smaller lures tends to really do well during the winter. An obvious cold water lure that works really well is a Ned rig. And if you think about it, it hits on all the S's we talked about, right? You fish it slow. It's a very subtle lure. It basically has no action. And the thing is it's small. You know, most Neds are 2.5 inches, 3 inches long. I mean, very, very small. And a Ned is a great lure to use in cold water months. Now, another cold water lure, the one that I'm fishing here today, is a jig, but this isn't your standard jig, right? I mean, look at the size of this thing. This is just a Strike King Bitsy Bug. And guys, I'm gonna leave the links for this jig and some Ned rig stuff that I like to use down below in the description if you wanna pick some of those things up. This jig is not a jig I typically fish at all during summer and during warmer weather months, but in cold water, this is the #1 jig that I pick up. This is a 1/4 ounce Bitsy Bug jig with a Zoom Super Chunk Junior on the back. This is one of my favorite baits to fish, and the fish seem to eat it in the coldest of cold water. Now, moving on to the fourth and final S of cold water fishing, and that is suspended. Sometimes during the winter, a lot of fish are actually going to suspend. So you may be fishing lures like a Ned rig or a jig like I am today, but you're actually fishing below the fish. It's very hard if you don't have electronics to be able to tell whether or not the fish are suspended. You know, today I really haven't seen too many marks really high in the water column. I think most of the fish today seem to be on the bottom, and that might be because we have some cloudier conditions. But a lot of times during the winter, the bass will suspend. So that is why it's so important to always keep a lure like a jerkbait or an Alabama rig with you, because you may be fishing in the right area. You may see some bait in that area, but you're simply fishing below the bass. So switching it up to a jerkbait or an Alabama rig can help you to catch those fish in that cold water where you're actually bringing that bait to their level. There's another one. Yeah. Woo. Golly, I just love it. Oh, not a big one, but man, it's still fun. Another solid fish. I love it. I love it. 43-degree water. It's about 38-degree air temperature. If you fish near deep water, if you fish something slow, you fish something subtle, you fish something small, you're gonna start catching bass in cold water. If you wanna watch me catch more fish on this jig, you can click this video right here. If you wanna watch me catch some smallmouth in cold water, you can click this video right here. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.